So is the transatlantic relationship about to split? Is this the end of the collective West? In the last few weeks, we've seen remarkable changes in the foreign policy stance of the United States. First, we had the Munich Security Conference where J.D. Vance basically criticized America's European allies, said that China and Russia were not the main threat to Europe. It was actually the European societies themselves. And he talked about free speech and talked up many causes célèbres that are pro-Kremlin. And that was a major departure from US foreign policy. It was unprecedented to do that also at the Munich Security Conference, where normally they emphasized the NATO relationship. NATO is obviously a North Atlantic Treaty Organization, so the transatlantic relationship, one of the pillars of that, and Article 5, which is the Common Defense Clause of the NATO Treaty, which basically provides a US security umbrella to historically Western Europe, but also now Western and Central Europe, and you could argue parts of Eastern Europe as well, with the three Baltic states. I'm actually in the Baltics today. That has now developed into the US voting in the United Nations with Russia and North Korea and Belarus against a Ukrainian resolution condemning the Russian aggression with the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine on the third anniversary. That was remarkable, definitely pretty different in terms of a foreign policy, obviously under the new president, Donald Trump. China, interestingly, abstained in that vote. And we'll come to that in a second, why this is an interesting new development that I had predicted a week or two ago. And obviously, my video from yesterday with the Jerry Springer-like scene in the Oval Office with Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, the American Vice President, basically bashing on their erstwhile ally, Vladimir Zelensky, and failing to sign a reconstruction fund that would have been financed by Ukrainian new mineral extraction, and the whole thing becoming a huge debacle and basically looking like they're about to abandon Ukraine in terms of military support at the very least. So this begs the question, is the United States actually pivoting towards being in an alliance with authoritarian regimes like Russia and being against liberal democracies and their allies in Europe like France, Germany, and obviously Ukraine? In obviously the scope of this channel is the Russo-Ukrainian war. So that is the trend we've been on. Is it ideologically driven? There are a lot of indicators that is the case, especially from J.D. Vance and his also advocacy and campaigning in effect for the Alternative für Deutschland, which came second in the recent German elections. They will not be in the government. It will be the CDU that will form the coalition, and we'll have a new chancellor in Friedrich Merz. And he was quite scathing of the US's behavior in the run-up to the election because he felt they were campaigning for a pro-Kremlin party that was obviously not the governmental party. There was no reason to be meeting with them, and that is unprecedented. Actually, in that spot in the Oval Office between Zelensky, Trump, and Vance, Vance even brought up the fact that Zelensky had gone to a munitions factory in Pennsylvania during the US election campaign, which he claimed was campaigning for the opposition, which was rather a bizarre claim since Joe Biden was actually the president of the United States and J.D. Vance would have been the opposition at the time. And he had every right to go to a munitions factory because it was relevant to this war effort and the US was helping. Would that have played in favor of Joe Biden more than Donald Trump? Yes, because Donald Trump was against giving the aid, and this aid, creates jobs in the US, but I don't think it crossed any line in terms of campaigning. On the other hand, Vance has behaved in a very more open way, campaigning for several political parties, also in Romania as well, advocating for Călin Georgescu, who's now been indicted in Romania for his ties with Russia, very openly pro-Kremlin parties against what is supposed to be the foreign policy of the United States. So we are seeing this pivot, and it's not that we've got to the point where you can say irreparably that the transatlantic alliance is broken. However, after the the debacle in the Oval Office, it's hard to imagine countries like the three Baltic states or Poland really believing that if Russia were to attack them, that the US is going to come and activate Article 5 and respond to protect them. That then eliminates the deterrence factor the United States was providing here in this part of Europe, and that is one of the pillars of the transatlantic relation. The other one, of course, is the trade. Relations very extensive between the United States and the European Union, and Donald Trump is threatening to impose a 25% tariff on goods coming from the European Union into the United States. So ending up in a trade war and then pivoting towards Russia with respect to the Russo-Ukrainian war and security, definitely if it continues down that path, we're going to see a complete rupture and we can't talk about the collective West anymore. I've been just near to here to Narva and looked at the river Narva, where you have Russia on one side with Ivangorod across a very short span of the river Narva, and you have a footbridge basically. Well, it's also a road bridge, but the road bridge was closed, the road part of it. From the Estonian side, and said this is the new Iron Curtain. We got the West, basic collective West on this side, and the other side you got Russia, a bit like during the Cold War, and the Soviet Union just at the border is dramatically further to the east nowadays. However, can we really speak about the collective West if the United States is not going to be a core part of that alliance? And that is the very worrying trend. I don't think we're quite at that point yet. I think now the US is threatening to cut off the aid to Ukraine. They've already, through USAID and shutting it down, they've basically taken out the financial element and the aid element to Ukraine. That was that's actually what USAID dispersed the most money towards. So we're not quite at the point where they're going to maybe disactivate remotely Starlink, for example, although that was apparently threatened. That was a rumor that Elon Musk denied, but considering the series of events, one has to be concerned about that. And I think at that point, if they actually start trying to help Russia, maybe by lifting the sanctions unilaterally, I think we're definitely at a point where we can say that the collective West is probably at the point of being irreparably harmed. Of course, there could be a new administration or turn of events in the US that would swing them back towards Europe, but I think it's getting to very close to a point where Europe will have to, or when I say Europe, I mean basically excluding parts that are geographically on the continent like Russia, that are obviously adversaries, that we're getting very close to the point where that will not be repairable. Even with a new administration, such will be the level of distrust. Interesting, this is why I mentioned China. I have talked about in the last 2 weeks on this channel how European countries will now almost inevitably start to pivot partially towards China, look to them to balance an increasingly hostile US. There's also the issue just with the US's even closer allies like Canada and Mexico, where Donald Trump keeps threatening them with tariffs almost non-stop and claims that he's going to annex Canada and obviously Greenland, which is part of Denmark. And that's actually led to a reaction in Canada that's becoming increasingly upset and discontent in the public towards the United States. We have seen in the last few hours, because I just woke up here, it's Sunday, the Ukrainian officials have started to talk about Vladimir Zelensky meeting with the Chinese leadership to involve them in the peace process. That is to the extent that they see that the United States is not on their side. It is not, it's never been a neutral interlocutor because the United States has been backing Ukraine even since 2014, with increasing amount of material and support, financial and military, even when Donald Trump was in his first term as president. And now they are starting to discuss openly meeting with the Chinese premier and bringing in China. So remember, China's helping Russia in this war. They are supplying some support in terms of equipment. And they're also buying a lot of Russian resources, mainly on the cheap, since Russia can't sell those very easily to Europe anymore. So they have pivoted themselves to try and sell them to India and China. That is something I predicted would happen in general, and now we're seeing it start. Donald Trump had this idea of a peace process where he was going to exclude Ukraine and Europe from most of it, and then just claim that he was neutral and negotiate directly with Russia. And that is the equivalent to Ukraine and China excluding Russia from the whole process and basically signing an agreement about how they're going to solve the peace crisis. This is the same. Both of them don't make much sense in terms of getting to any sort of long-term peace. Again, the underlying conditions for this war still exist. There is little to no chance of a long-term peace agreement. A ceasefire, I put it at 30 to 40% in my live stream on my lifestyle channel about a week ago. By the end of the year, I didn't believe that we would see a ceasefire as a result of what had been happening between Washington and Kiev in the last 2 weeks. And obviously now they didn't even sign the Reconstruction Fund agreement, so that's clearly off the table. So to answer your question, to the question I posed, is this the end of the collective West? Is this the end of the transatlantic relationship, the partnership that has been the cornerstone of European security and to a large extent transatlantic security since the end of the Second World War? We are getting perilously close to that point, but I wouldn't say we're right at the rupture. It would take a few more steps by the United States in order for that to happen, but we are now seeing Ukraine openly pivot slightly towards China, involving China, and making these overtures, and I expect that probably behind the scenes the same is happening in other European capitals. So not a great day here in the Baltics to discuss this. People here are pretty shocked. They've always believed the United States is their friend. They have now slowly come to the realization that's no longer the case, sadly, that they can count on the United States. And yeah, we could be in a multipolar world, not because China and Russia have risen relatively to really challenge the United States. Just the United States is by itself self-destructing. It's destroying its own alliance and creating different spheres of influence across the globe and definitely different forces. We're going to end up in a multipolar world where maybe we'll have Europe, United States, China as the three major poles. Europe needs to get its act together in order to achieve that. So we're definitely living in interesting times. I'll leave it at that and see you in the next video. Definitely like and subscribe. I know we don't say that at the end of videos, but now that I'm pushing on to create more and more content for this geopolitical channel, just make sure that you're subscribed and share with anyone that you think will get some value from this video. So we'll say, do побачення.